welcome to Design Associates. We're doing this live podcast, video podcast out on Facebook, as well as we're doing it on a pre-recording. Nicholas, Executive Board Director in Southern California, and I'm also the AILA Liaison National Chapter for law school, law students, law journals. We just had this amazing roundtable, incredible. This is the first time I joined AILA University doing something like this. They had Frank, the founder of The Voice. They had Alan, Executive Director at AILA. Mm-hmm. Who else was there?
Greg Chen, who's I think he's a spokesman, or he's very much like high up on the pecking order of AILA National. He's goes in front of. He speaks to Congress people. He's very much a player within the DC space, and he's a big AILA. He's kind of a big face of AILA. Him and Ben Johnson, who's I think he's the director. Yeah. It was great to have to be able to speak to in that kind of virtual roundtable, to kind of hear from them what they're seeing. Right. As far as the inside baseball has to.
So good, and we'll post a video later on. We'll post it on the link below. Who else was there? The political advisor to Kamala Harris, talking about, and the purpose of assembling all these people to discuss the immigration issue is to really break down every presidential candidate, what their immigration policy is. A lot of the discussion was actually centered around how can the Democratic Party beat Trump. Mm-hmm. It wasn't very PC, right? It wasn't like, the Republican parties have good. I mean, it was very blue. It was definitely very blue.
And I think because one thing we really have to come to terms with is there's politics and then there's something different. Mm-hmm. And I think we're in a different time. Mm-hmm. I think we're past the point of politics because the last 3+ years, it's not been about politics. Mm-hmm. It's been about cruelty. It's been about pain. It's been about separation. And so I think as we, kind of the rival party or people that identify politically kind of from the other side of the aisle, we have to call a spade a spade. And, to say that, we need to be more politically correct or be mindful, I think that time has passed. And I think leadership and the kind of conversations that we're having is I think we all have to start realizing, there is good and there is bad. Maybe there's a gray, but it when you see it. And I don't think there's much that this administration has done within the immigration space that is anything more than not just bad, but again, cruel. And so I think they spoke to that.
It's amazing. So what's really interesting is that the Democratic Party has really shifted to being pro-immigration. In the past 8 years, 12 years, we almost take that for granted. But in the past, Democratic Party was actually against immigration, and it's the Republicans that were for immigration.
Or at least if we can't go for or against, because again, it is so nuanced. Frank, the speaker on the roundtable, was saying that he thought how wild it was that, within a short period of time that Dems were talking about, if you're not thinking like a Republican, then don't think at all. Right. And to be now, fast forward so many years, now in 2020, it is pretty fascinating. And I think it's a testament to this current administration has really shown a light on how much power a handful of individuals have on the well-being of the immigrant community. And this isn't just... This isn't just, southern border issues. This isn't just asylum issues. I mean, from your own experiences, you're seeing this in the employment side. You're seeing this on the business side. I mean, very few people can basically say not only no, but try to undo years and years and years of precedent to try to make things nearly impossible.
Why should people care about immigration in this election, right? I mean, it's not a topic that's been heavily focused on compared to healthcare. And even when they do focus on immigration, it's just those key button topics. They focus on DACA. They focus on the detention center. They focus on travel ban. But in the world of immigration, there's so much more.
It's like the health field. To talk about cancer or to talk about child mortality, those are just one or two variables in a cornucopia of issues. And we know And that's why these roundtables are so wonderful, is you get to really speak to people that are in your field to kind of talk about not just the big ticket items like the ones you mentioned, but also the nuanced ones, independent immigration courts, AAOs and the different BIAs and the different entities that really regulate this space, and how far they've gone kind of, let's say, to the right, where no longer is it, if it's 1 + 1 is 2, now it's 1 + 1, well, it just depends. And so I find it so fascinating that maybe it took, to your point, as far as the Dems maybe being far more right in our own lifetime with immigration, it took somebody this bad in an administration this cruel and this just careless to remind us that if we don't stand up for these communities, who will? Right?
You're a hardcore Democrat.
I'm a hardcore smart person.
Okay. And who are you voting for in this election?
Great question. So I think anybody other than Bernie Sanders is not necessarily a waste of time, but I do think you're bringing a knife to a gunfight. One way I've put it these last few weeks is these other candidates, non-Bernie candidates, are Band-Aids, are medicine to help you with this flu, this pandemic. I think Bernie Sanders is the antidote. And of course, this pandemic is this administration. I think what he represents and the coalition he's building behind him, it is based on merit, it is based on science, it is based on compassion. I think what he represents and the people that support him, more importantly, represent what makes America so wonderful and kind of brings us back to a pre-Reagan era when somebody who wasn't born wealthy or somebody who was born somewhere else could grow up and exist in the United States and have a chance to make something of themselves. And I think that's why people are so scared of him, because I think he really, really speaks to structural change. And sometimes people speak to those things but don't actually want it because they're within that same structure.
Wonderful. I'm going to challenge you on that later on. It's always easier to play the devil's advocate.
Absolutely.
But before we do that, we should really summarize what happened at this round table. So the majority of it is everybody's talking from their different viewpoints. They're summarizing the political landscape right now, the different talking points. And I think the main discussion is that the Democrats, they are all saying the same thing. They want a fair justice system. The humanitarian situation is not good. The travel ban is inhumane. But they're not really proposing a solution. This kind of reminds me of the British election with Brexit. Everybody was just saying, no, we need a good system. We need a smart system. But the person that won was just saying, no, we'll just get it done. Very similarly, analogously to the Trump administration, he's in the past 3.5 years, he set out direct policies. The travel ban, the detention, stopping refugees from coming to the border, making USCIS adjudicate cases much more stringently, and denying all the visas abroad for employers, making H-1B much more difficult. So he's doing all of these things, all with one intent in mind: stopping people from coming in.
Well, certain people.
Certain people, and actually just more people in general, right? I mean, what group did he make it easier? Right, not the investors, not EB-5 investors, not EB-1C, EB-1A. I mean, I do all the employment side of immigration. None of that got easier. Normally, typically in a Democrat-Republican election, Democrats make things easier for a good number of people, and so they can get visas. Republicans make things generally more difficult, and you need to just come up with a better application. With this administration, they made things really difficult, and they made it almost impossible. They straight up banned it, and from all avenues, right? At the border, the Mexican border, people can't even come in to apply for asylum and refugee. At the airports with the CBP, travel ban immediately turned them away. From the executive order, with USCIS, Department of Homeland Security, with the consulates abroad, right, just constantly blocking everybody from coming in. So that's what he did, and I think his constituents wanted that to happen, right? His core constituents, the fringe minority on this majority on the side who elected him, are seeing their jobs taken away. They're seeing that their lifestyle is not improving. They really bought into that fear factor that immigrants and outsiders come in and take away their stuff, and so by all means possible prevent that from happening. So that's everything that he did, and I think, and from the discussion, everybody's criticizing how he did that. It's inhumane. You're separating families. All the rhetoric. But on the other side, from a public policy standpoint, yes, it's not nice to take children away. But what about our children? Right? We can't even feed ourselves. We don't have enough food stamps to live on, right? So he's totally appealing to his constituents. And if the Democratic Party candidate cannot win part of those people, then there's still a high chance that Trump might be elected again. The electability of the Democratic Party really depends on if they can appeal to the middle and the fringe voters who elected Trump, and part of the reason why Trump won, and again, nobody really expected that. I don't think his party, his team didn't even expect that. And part of it is because when Hillary was running against him, Hillary just looked too much like corporate America, even though she was the Democrat, but she looked too much like corporate America. Her policies, her talking points, what she stood for, didn't seem like it was going to benefit the average Joe. Bernie Sanders and many of the other hard-swing left, now they are trying to appeal to that, but I don't know if they're doing good enough job, especially with immigration. The immigration policies that they are all standing up for. And AILA University put out a very, very good comparison guide holding USCIS, the Department of Homeland Security, accountable, legal immigration courts, access to counsel, humanitarian law and border enforcement accountability, all of these things, they mostly agree. They're like 90% the same. But none of them really touch on the core issue. What about me? The idea, the support base for Trump. Right, and so that was the big critique during this roundtable discussion. I think when they are gonna face off against Trump, whoever it is facing against Trump in the main election, Trump is probably gonna appeal to the xenophobia. It's gonna be the fear factor. He says, "Well, I did all of these things, and I kept America safe." And it's worked, and we're thriving. Coronavirus is destroying every other part of the world, and they're socialist and they don't have good medical policies, but we do, and I blocked everybody off and it worked, and I kept America safe, and that's my job as the head of the executive branch. How is the Democratic Party going to respond to that?
Well, I think it ultimately comes down to, just because you say something doesn't make it true. Mm-hmm. And his entire platform is just saying stuff. Mm-hmm. None of it being true, most of it being a complete fabrication, which we know to a fact that the things he said are oftentimes just completely incorrect. Mm-hmm. But again, his 30%, and when you say his base or the people that elected him, it was only ever 30%. Mm-hmm. That's who's going to vote for him no matter what. Mm-hmm. I always like this stat that 30% of people in the United States at the time sided with the British during the American Revolution. 30% of people thought civil rights was bad. Mm-hmm. I think there's always going to be 30%, and we've seen this statistically in our history, that side with no change mm-hmm. or the status quo. But 30% is not enough, and it's never been enough. And so that's why you want to, if we're going to go back to 2016, it was not a resounding victory. Mm-hmm. If anything, he won by the skin of his teeth. Mm-hmm. Joseph, as you know, I love sports, mm-hmm. and I love sports analogies. Mm-hmm. He was the team that was just happy to be there. Mm-hmm. Hillary and the Dems were the overall favorite that were already polishing the trophy. Mm-hmm. But then the game had to be played. Mm-hmm. And by the skin of his teeth, a couple of breaks went his way. Wisconsin, Michigan, mm-hmm. Pennsylvania. The Dems didn't take care of those places. Mm-hmm. They thought they had it in the bag, so they didn't mm-hmm. spend enough time. And like you said, the candidate themselves was a little bit old school. Mm-hmm. And he won. having lost the popular vote by 3 million votes, and I've read some statistics that say he could lose it by 6 million because he's not a popular president. But to your point about messaging, to your point about what the average American wants, I think it's 12 Americans live in California, right? We're 40 million strong in the state of California, fifth greatest economy. I find it fascinating that we think the everyday American is white because that's not necessarily the case. It's also interesting to think about it from the standpoint of the fringe is no longer the fringe. Obama was elected not by white men from the Midwest. He was elected by women, people of color, young people, because he spoke to what he believed the United States could be, where we needed to go. And I think that hope messaging, I think you see that a lot with, again, Bernie Sanders' campaign to say, what I'm advocating is not new. I'm simply talking about an era that the greatest generation got to grow up in, where they could afford school, they could afford a home, they can have a family, they could afford their health care. None of that is radical. That is quite literally the basis of what we believe is, again, the greatest generation. And that provided post-World War II the greatest kind of era in American history as far as prosperity. And so I think from an immigration standpoint, one of the statistics they said is that amongst the U.S. population, 75% of Americans think immigration is good. And I think when it comes to messaging, all of those ideas of I kept us safe and I'm closing borders, et cetera, we are more brown and more immigrant than we've ever been from the standpoint of a country in all recesses of that country, from Kansas City to Des Moines to Maine, you name it. Everybody, it's harder now than ever before to be secluded and isolated in a space that doesn't have somebody that's from somewhere else. And I think with that human interaction, and you saw these stories these last few years, a county that was overwhelmingly voted for Trump and has supported him are up in arms because the Guatemalan man who runs the restaurant that everybody loves gets deported. And it's that classic, oh, I'm against it until it happens to me. And I think we're really at a fever pitch when it comes to immigration because I think the inhumane treatment, and the things that people do hear from the public, not immigration attorneys, not the things we deal with, employment, things of that nature. I think if you were to ask 10 people, 75%, 7 of them would say, yeah, you're right, that seems unfair. If people are fleeing persecution, they should be able to come. And if they're vetted and make sure they're not going to be a danger to society. Oh, and look at these statistics. Refugees and migrants are overwhelmingly a boon to our economy because they come in wanting to start a life for themselves. Right. So everything you said is all about messaging, right? And at the end of the day, his message is bad, 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 fear, 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 fear. And we know that when you don't have a leg to stand on policy, you have to go to that xenophobic, you have to go to that, and Brexit was the same thing, right? Parts of Europe are dealing with the same thing. Parts of non-Europe are dealing with the same thing. Blame the people that don't look like us. Meanwhile, billionaires are getting away with not paying $1 in federal income taxes, right? People are able to buy elections because at the end of the day, it's those things that are drying up tax bases that really go to why are people being left behind? It's not because of the brown guy that's trying to, get by. He's, if anything, more like you than the billionaire CEO that runs the company who just shipped your jobs off so he can make more on the quarterly dividend.
So you're definitely against Michael Bloomberg.
I mean, I think, again, from the standpoint of the aspect of billionaires and the 1%, I think they're so disengaged from reality by a majority of Americans, by most of us, that to think they can lead is, I think, laughable. Yeah. And not a billionaire myself, nor nor someone that comes from money. I think the cold realities and truths of life have everything to do with money. And if you don't come from it, you've had to realize that. And if you didn't come from it as a child, and you had to figure those things out, I think it makes you who you are. And that's why someone like Bloomberg, I think he came in for a very specific reason, to beat a Bernie Sanders, to beat an Elizabeth Warren, because their platforms to really go after the 1% are threatening to that 1%.
Yeah, it's crazy. Man, but still, the people who want to vote for Trump, or the people who are disenfranchised by corporate America, by America in general, I just don't know if they see in the past 3.5 years or 4 years, Trump was supposed to make their life better. but in the past 4 years, the economy boomed, but their life didn't
Exactly.
get better.
If anything, the people that run the companies that they pay them slave wages did great.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And that's exactly the point. And that's why I think when it comes to messaging is this guy said all of these things and you were unfortunately silly enough to believe him.
Mm-hmm.
You're now the person having been sold the used car that didn't do anything that you thought it would do. You spend more money.
Mm-hmm.
You're worse off now than you were then.
Mm-hmm.
But he's telling you, no. Buy another car from me.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right that it is a wake-up call from the, let's say, that 20%, the non-30% that we'll need from, whatever the Dems have as a base.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just about being sensible, thinking to yourself, does this guy's venom and toxicity and the way he pads his own pockets and he's not even scared to show that he's doing, does that really give you any sense of pride as an American? Or is it kind of, do you roll your eyes and say, oh, well, that's politicians? And do you almost make excuses for it because you're like, oh, well, again, my life's not been affected. If anything, maybe it's gotten worse.
Okay. Well, we're already 20 minutes in. Okay.
Time flies when you're having fun,
crazy.
Joseph.
That was a good speech for Bernie Sanders. Let's focus on some of the key issues for people who don't know the immigration policies and what people are standing on, because it is kind of confusing. What does it mean to vote Democrat? What does it mean to vote Republican? We'll start there. And then what does it mean to vote for each specific candidate? We'll just talk about Warren, Pete Buttigieg, and Bernie.
Yeah.
Who else should we talk about?
I mean, Biden, I guess, could be the fourth.
Biden will be good. It's tough to talk about Bloomberg because he doesn't really have any policies out. He came so late into the game, and so
Shocker.
there's no. Yeah, shocker, right? So there's not
It's called pay to play. So you were saying, their positions. What does it mean to vote one? What does it mean to vote the other? I thought the roundtable did a great job of kind of speaking to the idea that things have gotten so awry, and we see this in our practice every day, that, for whichever Democrat comes in, for them to basically say everything that this guy just did for the last 4 years, I'm going to undo it. I'm basically just going to hit reverse.
Yeah.
And there was some conversation about that.
Yeah.
Right? Jonathan Orr said, that's not politics. That's just emotional response. We need to think about things in the greater sense of things. We need to think about things in the balance that this government has.
Right.
And then there were some people that said, I agree. However, sometimes you got to stop the bleeding first before you can, mend the wound.
So many changes have been made in the past 3.5 years. It's unbelievable.
Well, and what's wild is to think about how quickly those changes can be undone and how fickle this world we operate in is. That one person, and with the Congress that doesn't seem to care about their own powers to maybe checks and balances, can allow that one person to kind of go off unfettered.
Well, they were part of his party, right? So they were kind of in favor of it. Big changes have been made in the past too, but it's just crazy in 3.5 years. Let's start with the big picture. If you vote Republican this time, if you vote Trump again, you basically stand for everything that he's done in the past.
100%.
One big thing is you change the mission of USCIS. It's not here to serve the immigrants. You basically become a very nationalistic country. You're not trying to be a leader in the global space. You're backing out of the Paris Agreement. You're backing out of these major treaties, and you're putting you're strictly isolating yourself from the rest of the world. You're making these policy moves that's not humanitarian.
You're keeping kids locked up. You're denying people who've been fleeing persecution their ability to plead their case.
And before this presidency, before these changes were made, there were Republicans and there were Democrats, but more or less in comparison to this, we were much more humane. We had really good law. Immigration was broken, but it was broken in the sense that there's not enough quota. The line was too long, but now it's completely different. We changed the mission statement of the department. That's insane.
We went from having issues with our electrical issues in our car to our transmission and engine being broken.
Right. Which you completely changed a different car, right? I mean, it completely changed the.
You complained about this car, but now you have a worse car. Maybe you should have tried to fix the first. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, now you don't have a car.
Absolutely.
So that's what it means to vote Republican versus Democrat. But if you vote Democrat, there's no clear policy. What does it mean, right? Nobody's coming out with a very clear platform. Some people don't even. Okay, well, there a few people are saying they're going to have this comprehensive policy, and I like the people who are coming up with these comprehensive policies.
It's the leaders. It's the leaders on the Dems that have.
Yeah, exactly. Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, they all worked with Congress before. They all know how to get it done. What I found really funny, that Bloomberg is not on that list. He's like, no, I'll tweak it. I'll tweak the system as it is. But, I mean.
There's a reason why only in the last 30 years have we seen this happen. Is because we've been slowly but surely in that income inequality. I mean, again, I'm not a hardcore Dem. I'm a hardcore smart person.
Right.
We're going to look at the data. We're going to see what things change, and we're going to make.
You sound like you're a supporter for Andrew Yang.
It's one of those things where, going back to sports, you can have the right mentality, but is that going to be? Are your guys going to listen to you? Are you going to be able to execute that?
Yeah.
And in the same way that you can, I mean, that's, I think, one of the positives about maybe having a little bit of a contentious Democratic primary is that we're seeing a lot of stars. Your Castros, your Bookers, those people have been around, but we got to see them elevated. We got to see their policies.
I love it.
Kamala Harris. And if we're talking about our generation, us going into our mid to late 30s, going into our 40s, going into this time when it's us who they're talking to. I think those are some great leaders that we can have some faith in, that when they come in or they're continued or they get these roles in potentially a new administration, that, I got to see them kind of on the spotlight, and they weren't just a politician saying the right things. They seemed like they really cared.
Right.
And so from that standpoint, I think we're in a situation where you look at the facts, you look at the data, and again, billionaires are a byproduct. They're not the goal. With two people that are worth more than 50% of Americans, I mean, there's a reason that hasn't happened in a very long time.
Right. So let's start with the clear things, and then we'll go into the unclear. The clear things that almost all the Democratic nominees, they're all supporting, reducing the detention center. If people don't know, tons of people who are traveling in and out of the country, people who got arrested, they just got put in these detention centers.
Not always because they got arrested either.
Right.
Not always.
They just get picked up. I had a client from Hong Kong, very, very wealthy, rich person coming in just to travel, but through mistranslation, he got put in detention center for 2 weeks. Insane. I mean, this just doesn't happen on the international community. It almost felt like a third world country.
Yep.
You fly into a country, miscommunication, somehow you end up in jail for 2 weeks, couldn't get a flight to get out, and people mistakenly put in his file with applying for asylum. Insane. Absolutely insane. Unheard of. But yeah, detention center, it's a terrible situation. The border situation, everybody's against that. They want to have an appropriate asylum application.
I think independent immigration courts, because right now they're under the Department of Justice. I just think a real separation of power from the standpoint of, we've had immigration our entire existence as a country.
Right.
We are built on said immigration.
Right.
To think logically about these things is all we're asking. So I think that's where there's similarities across the board.
Right.
And I think what they're not talking about is these radical ideas that people want to say, this person's pro-immigration, therefore they want blank.
Right.
Nobody ever wants blank. Those hardcore, extreme ideas, that doesn't make sense, especially if you're in this world. It's just like, that wouldn't be workable.
Yeah. Well, we'll do another podcast about the immigration court situation. I mean, a lot of people think there is already the federal court system. There's an they're seeing the Supreme Court rule on immigration. Isn't that it? But it's so little.
Yeah.
It's so little. The 0.001%. Everything else is being adjudicated by
administrative entities
that are directed by the executive branch. So whatever politician you have and whatever agenda they have, they get to choose, and they will have to execute accordingly, which is absolutely insane. The humanitarian situation, a lot of people are pro
humanitarian
DACA,
policy.
Humanitarian policy, DACA.
TPS, right? Temporary protective status.
That's right. Creating a path to citizenship for the Hispanic community.
Or just, community, because, right, statistically we're seeing that it's not Mexican nationals that are coming into the United States. If anything, we're seeing an exit immigration far more than we're seeing in incoming. And I think statistically, it's Chinese nationals, it's African nationals, and Indian nationals who are from the southern border coming in more unlawfully than any other groups. And so it's again, using logic and using data, you can see people come for very specific reasons.
Right.
And when we have blanket prohibitions that have nothing to do with merit, we know this. You see this case. You see this denial that's just a boilerplate denial that copy and paste, and they even got the name wrong.
Right.
And you say nobody's paying attention, and they basically say we're going to rubber stamp nose.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So if you vote for the Democratic Party, those are the policies that you are standing for, as opposed to the Trump policies that he's enacted in the past 3.5 years. Now, we don't have time to now go into specifics, each individual person, but everything is on AILA University. We're also going to put the roundtable discussion that we just watched and participated in on the link below. Anything else we should talk about?
I think with Super Tuesday upon us, right, as we're filming this is the Friday before Super Tuesday. I think it's been pretty clear that aggressive policies are going to work. I think aggressive policies on the Democratic side are what people want. I think, if you're under 40 and you're a millennial, if you're under, 20 and you're a Gen Zer, together we are the greater population of any other population in this country. And so we need to start realizing we have far more power than we think. And that it's not people that are established, people with money, it's not people that are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s that should make these decisions. If anything, this is our world that we're inheriting. We want politicians that are not thinking about today as it was, but how it will be. Climate change, right? This is an immigration-focused podcast and video. But, if you're not beating the drum on climate change, then you should not be running for any type of political position, because this is a real dire situation. And all of these things, climate change, immigration, housing, right, income inequality, these are all tied to the same ideas, right? People that are doing the work are not getting their fair share. And so we need, as we go into Super Tuesday, we need to really think long and hard who represents a rebalancing, if you will, of this very, very extreme 3+ years. There's a few candidates that do. And at the end of the day, as one of our colleagues said on the round table, it's vote blue no matter what. And I think at this position, or at this point in time, like you said, if you vote Republican or you're voting for this current administration, I think there is some blood on your hands. And I don't think that's hyperbole. I think that's real. I think if you stand by what's going on, I think you have to look yourself hard in the mirror and say, why?
Right. Well, that's it for today. I think that was really good. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure as always, amazing. Joseph. Thanks for having me. We'll see you guys next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.